one of the 4 o'clock games here, Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams. Again, the Rams chose to sit Matthew Stafford and their other starters, and they lose to Seattle. It's 30-25. They did come down to the end. Jimmy Garoppolo had a chance to pull off the game-winning comeback at the end if they fell short. And this moved the Rams from the 3 seed to the 4 seed. So the difference being Commanders or the Vikings coming to town. So they now have the Vikings coming to town next Monday night in the wild card game. Rams finish at 10-7. The Seahawks finish at 10-7. They're one of there's 15 teams that have at least 10 wins this year. The Seahawks are the only one not going to the playoffs.
Wow, that's a pretty wild stat. Yeah, I mean, that whole decision, that whole attitude from the Rams is fascinating. The team that pioneered resting all their starters in preseason, not risking anybody to injury. They've got players that are banged up, but, so does a lot of other teams. And they're prioritizing injuries and health over anything else. They had, that's theoretically a big risk, right? To opt in to potentially hosting the loser of this Minnesota-Detroit matchup, a 14-win team, regardless of the fact that you beat one of those teams already, that you came close to the other one. To opt into that is a fascinating decision. And they're like, no, we're going to do it anyway. Obviously, it was probable rather than a guarantee. They almost beat Seattle. Jimmy Garoppolo had a shot to do it, didn't get it done. But it is a fascinating sort of decision-making process to go, the most important thing is not risking anybody to injury. We want to be healthy regardless of who we're playing.
And with Stafford in particular, I kind of get it with the beating that he takes and some of the back injuries and various things that he's had through the years. I would be interested if they did put Puka Nacua out there and they put some of the starters out there with Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, Garoppolo is throwing to Jordan Whittington and Demarcus Robinson.
Right.
And, we can't bench everybody. Tutu Atwell's still out there. But if you put a few more players out there, they had some backup offensive linemen out there. Would the Rams actually have a chance of holding on to that number 3 seed? Maybe they don't care at all. But that was the decision they made. Seattle took advantage to get the win. 4 touchdown passes from Geno Smith, and he had the game-winning touchdown to seal the deal for them.
Yeah, and the other thing that was sort of a storyline of this weekend is all of the various individual incentives that were on the line. We've already talked about Mike Evans and not just his record, his 1,000-yard streak, but he got $3 million for that. That was an incentive he hit. Geno Smith had $6 million on the line in this game for individual incentives.
Where did he land?
He hit all 6 of them because the last one there were 3, I think, $2 million incentives. One was for completion percentage or completions. One was yardage, I think. And the third one, the one that he needed to get over the line, was the win. So he'd already hit 4 million of them. And then the only one up for grabs was, does he complete the W or not by the end of the game? So he makes $6 million, gets $6 million richer from this outcome.
And look, I've compared Geno Smith's resurgence a lot to Baker Mayfield's. I'm not the only one, but there's elements of that too, right? Like when you in a lot of gotta have it type of situations where I feel like they'll give you a chance to come through. So good for Geno. Happy you got those incentives, and ends up a disappointing season for Seattle at 10-7, just not making the playoffs. But first year of Mike McDonald, I think there's places to build around as well there. And then, see where they go next year, especially on the defensive side of the ball up front on the D-line.
The defense really started to come on. I think they're a good team, and I think they have a lot of they've got very few weaknesses. The problem is the one glaring weakness on paper coming into the season was a problem, right? Like you looked at this team, the roster top to bottom, and you said they're good everywhere except the interior of the offensive line. And the interior of the offensive line looks problematically bad.
Yeah, the O-line moves this offseason for Seattle.
And then, they signed Connor Williams coming off his injury, and then he retired on them. So it's like, okay, potentially a player that might have fixed things didn't end up being a big factor for them. So, but it's one of those sort of unfortunate situations where something that looked like it might be a problem did end up being the Achilles heel of this team, and at least was enough to lose them a couple of games, which is the difference between making the playoffs and not.
I'll say this. I mean, watching what Jahmyr Gibbs did in the red zone on just that little angle route, as I was doing the research on Darnold, number 1 completion percentage inside the 10, I'm like, well, who's worst? Well, it's Geno Smith, and we've talked a ton about his red zone woes. It would be interesting to see Seattle get that dynamic running back threat that could become a red zone mismatch weapon. I feel like a lot of Seattle's answers need to be up front, and then how do you get Geno to play better in some of the situational football? Because that ends up being huge over the course of the season.
That is such a wild problem to work on in the offseason.
Multi-year issue for Geno Smith.
Like you have, I genuinely can't think of another example like this where you have a quarterback that's really, really good overall, and then not just gets worse in the red zone, but becomes one of the worst quarterbacks in football in the red zone. I mean, that's so bad that it's one of those things. Remember, we were sort of joking about the Arizona Cardinals and how they used to have Matt Leinart and Kurt Warner, and they had a designated red zone quarterback. And the 49ers, way back when they were getting Joe Montana to take over the job, used to have Steve DeBerg between the 20s, and then Joe Montana was the red zone quarterback, and that was how they got his feet wet before he eventually took over the job.
Sam Howell, red zone quarterback.
Well, back then, the red zone was seen as the easier gig. That was like where you get the quarterback, get him used to it. Now I think it's the exact opposite, where you've got actually between the 20s is the easier bit, and then it gets hard in the red zone. But, I don't know, how do you get a guy to just stop being atrocious in the red zone? Or, is it possible that they have a better option in the red zone? Is he so bad that you're actually better off with Sam Howell in the red zone?
Offseason, baby. By the way, I mean, if you're new at Check the Mic, we love the season. I don't want to speak for you all the time, but I might love the offseason more. I might love team building season even more. We'll talk a lot about Seattle's team building, everyone's team building this offseason and what they should be doing from a personnel perspective.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.